Welcome everybody to another episode of Nerdsplain It. I am joined by Jess.
Hello.
Greg.
What's going on?
And the fourth horseman of the Nerdpocalypse, Dave Burke.
Hi everybody! I don't actually sound like that.
On today's episode of Nerdsplain It, we are going to be dipping our toes in the water of the grand scale of timelines in comics. Today we are going to be discussing Marvel's timeline and DC's timeline. We're just going to be tackling the big two today, giving a broad overview of the ins and outs of the big things that have happened, giving people some ideas of the big stories, the big universe-altering events. If some of the lingo we throw around seems a little deep, you can check our first episode out where we touch base on some of the common vernacular and words that are completely made up to enjoy comic book universes. So I believe to start us off, I think we're going to jump into Marvel's timeline a little bit.
I'm super confused. I've done super confused. I've done some research and trying to understand DC's timeline, and there are these big events that I've heard multiple times before, and maybe I didn't know the storyline, but it was pretty easy to jump in and kind of read up and understand what's going on. And then I went to check out what's happened in Marvel's history, and it's really not that easy to jump on board with.
Yeah, each company has its own complications when you try to jump in and look at the timeline. To put it into another nerd perspective, I would say that DC very much parallels Doctor Who. Doctor Who has a new doctor every so often, and it's been going for 50-something years now. But you don't have to start at the beginning. You can pick up during a certain era. That's very much how DC is. You can read your Golden Age, your Silver Age. You can do pre or post Crisis on Infinite Earths or post Infinite Crisis. There's a lot of different jumping off points. And you may get references to earlier material, but not necessarily. Marvel is like trying to watch Days of Our Lives from the beginning. They have big events, but the characters stay the same after those events. They might have personality tweaks, they might have power tweaks, but for the most part, the histories they've always had. After Marvel's House of M, Tony Stark is still an alcoholic or a recovering alcoholic. After Marvel's Civil War, not Captain America's Civil War, but Marvel's Civil War, Spider-Man is, still Peter Parker. And here's where it gets into an issue sometimes that I have with Marvel is they do these big events, and then within about 18 months, they wind up doing what's called a retcon, a retroactive continuity shift. So they go through, and if you look at Civil War, big event that was in Civil War, everybody talked about, oh my God, Spider-Man unmasked in front of the media and revealed himself to be Peter Parker. Oh man, what does this mean for his friends, his family, his loved ones, the danger that puts them in? Turns out 18 months later, it didn't matter. They did something to erase everyone's memory of who he was. And they've done that.
So kind of like flashback.
In a certain way, yeah. And they honestly, and I'm a huge Daredevil fan. I've been reading Daredevil for years and years, and I don't pay attention to many Marvel big events because ultimately I don't necessarily feel like they pay off sometimes. But it gets troublesome when I'm reading, the latest issue of Daredevil. Well, not the latest, but I think this happened 10 months ago. And all of a sudden, nobody knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. Oh, now a couple people know that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. Now everybody knows because he went public again. Oh, now nobody knows. So it gets very frustrating with that because he still has all that history. His ex-girlfriend is still a dead smack addict, et cetera and so forth.
Dark.
True.
So from the outside looking in, right?
Mhm.
Our timeline. Now this is going to sound terrible, but are timelines important in the aspect of, say, I am new to Spider-Man, right? I watch the movies and I'm enthralled about Spider-Man, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
At what point, for me, would it be worth my time to look into timelines when continuity shifts and is different from the current Spider-Man that I like? Would I then take the time to look up the Spider-Man story that I've grown to know now, or do I go and look at the past history to catch up to the Spider-Man I just now fell in love with?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like with Wonder Woman,
Mhm.
like that fueled my fire a bit, and I wanted. Of course, I knew some,
Okay.
but as the movie got closer, there was more that I wanted to know. It's really up to you as the consumer.
Okay.
If you want to know the history and dive in deeper, that's fine. I mean, but that's with DC, that's easier to do, from what I understand,
Right.
because these big events happen, and okay, this is where I want to jump in. Like
Right.
this writer, this is where I want to jump in. I can explore things later.
Right. I think the best way to answer Greg's question about the importance of the timeline and how that fits in with continuity reaches back to the terminology, one of the terms that we used in our first episode, which was headcanon. So, as the reader, you have the choice of deciding what is continuity in your head. So, if you find a particular story that you really, you're attached to for whatever reason, whether it's the moral of the story or just the entertainment level of the story, you can decide that happened to Spider-Man or that happened to Wolverine. In your head, that is what happened in that character's life. And if you're more interested in what was going on with other characters at that time, okay, great. You have an era or a couple of years of publication that you can jump into and go from there.
Okay, so in that regard, would it be best to look up the writer? Because then obviously it's the writer,
Well,
right?
well, okay. So here's how. Getting back to your initial question, the first thing that popped in my head when you asked it was, uh, do you need to understand how a bow traveling across a cello string creates a resonant sound that goes into your ear and processes it as music to enjoy the music? Not at all. You enjoy a piece of music or you don't. It's To me, it's the same way with comics, and it's perfect that you use the example of Spider-Man because I think you and I are in the same boat on that one. There, for years, I've wanted to read more Spider-Man, but the more I hear, oh, there's really good stuff, and then there's pretty much everything else. So I basically kind of go and I research, reading lists. What are people's recommended best stories? And then I'll go through, and that's where I started with Spider-Man. I believe, it was the first thing I really read was Craven's Last Hunt, which is a fantastic story. If you're listening and you haven't read it, get out there, check it out. I'm pretty sure they just did a reprint in the last 18 months. Um, and then from there, I expanded into what you were just mentioning. Sometimes, yes, you will find an author that has jumped onto that character and can make all the difference. Jeff Loeb did a story for Marvel and for Spider-Man called Spider-Man Blue. Absolutely fantastic. It was part of a series he did with Hulk Gray and Daredevil Yellow that sort of, if I recall correctly, it's been a while since I've read, explored a lot of the origins of those characters, and they're fantastic. So, do you have to know all the history? No, you shouldn't have to, and I think that's kind of the point of the podcast in general,
Right, right.
is to dispel this idea that a lot of confrontational people in nerd culture have, that you have to know everything going in. You absolutely don't.
Very well put.
So the knowledge that everyone has is just the passion of going back and looking into it themselves. It's not a prerequisite. It's just
I mean, one of the big issues I have is you're getting into something that you have an interest in, and some asshole is standing back there going, well, you don't know everything. Do you know this?
Right.
For example, the fight I got into the other night on the beach with Mr. Drunk Ass.
Is that Mr. Brightside's less flattering cousin?
I got into a fight with some guy because he told me I didn't know shit about comics. And okay, I don't know everything, but just because I'm talking about a thing and I'm enjoying it and you think that you know more, like, it's not important. Like, let's not compare the knowledge level that everyone has. Right. Let's help each other understand.
Right.
So, yeah, that's exactly why we're here. Enjoy the art form for what it is.
Exactly.
Right.
And if you want to know more, we're now here to help you understand more in a way that's not
bullying.
Yeah.
And there are going back to the timeline thing, especially in, with the example of Spider-Man, you'll always hear about certain things, and certain big events, whether they were written well or not, are worth checking out. Okay. So for Spider-Man, the death of Gwen Stacy, it's worth a read. It's very much a product of its time, but it's worth a read. If you're doing your DC stuff, Crisis on Infinite Earths, oh boy, is it a 1980s comic? So it takes some getting through, but it's worth the read. And so sometimes, you start off. I would recommend, when you're jumping into a character, get a recommendation. If you have to search online, whatever, find the most common. When people make lists of their top stories of that character, find the most the ones that most commonly wind up in the top 3. Start with those, and then go back and explore anything else. Because eventually, you're going to have stuff. When you're reading, Batman, Hush, for example, you're bound to find a thing that they reference from another story that came earlier on, and then if that really sparks your interest, jump in and go, oh, okay, maybe I'll go back and check that out.
Yeah, and I really like the point that Dave brought up there when it comes to, when it comes to getting recommendations where to start. And when we, as Nerds Explain It, move forward, and we in our future episodes where we kind of single out a particular character, whether it's Superman, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Wonder Woman, Black Canary, whatever, we're going to find, we're going to give suggested options for reading, and give people an idea of where to start out. This is the stuff that we've read, or this is the stuff that we're currently reading about, XYZ character, and people who are listening, they're going to have an idea of, okay, hey, Nerds Explain It recommended this. I'll start off with this one, and if you like it, cool. Follow the rest of our recommendations. If you don't, well, then pick some. You'll find. Just randomly grab something out of a dollar bin. Just start grabbing.
Start somewhere.
Right. So the broad answer, the real question, the real answer to your question of are they important? Yes and no. So I mean, the minutia of what's going on in a universe's timeline is as important as the reader wants it to be.
Right.
Important for a trivia night, but not for general enjoyment.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
So is this where we want to kind of actually jump into discussing timelines, even though we just invalidated them?
The comic companies do it all the time. I don't see why it's any big issue if we invalidate them.
Right.
I mean, is that about all we have for Marvel? Is that they just have a tendency...
Marvel has had key events. They go big. Well, and I touched upon Civil War. I think another event that I think it gets a lot of flack, but I really enjoyed it with Marvel, was House of M. If you don't know what House of M is, it's not surprising it didn't make it into a movie. House of M was a fascinating thing. It was almost like a other world, like a what if, where Scarlet Witch has altered reality so in such a grand scale that the House of Magneto, so he and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and I'm pretty sure Polaris, now rule over the Earth. And many of the characters are switched around. I think Steve Rogers is actually a 70 or 80-year-old man. He's actually an overweight veteran, things like that.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's actually it's a neat story, but the spoiler alert on that one is how, and it's not really a spoiler. I think it's a 15-year-old comic at this point. House of M ends with the complete decimation of every mutant in the Marvel universe
Oh.
because Scarlet
Oh.
Witch whispers the words "No more mutants." So the world goes back to what it was before she had this freak out, except every mutant has been stripped of their powers entirely. That's great. That's mind blowing, but you can't sustain that in the Marvel universe. So eventually they had to go back and get those mutants their powers back. Because obviously, you're taking all the X-Men and now you've gone from the X-Men to the
Men. But
Okay.
there wasn't a conversation around the round table about how this could affect the whole existence of Marvel.
It started with it, but then Brian Michael Bendis laid out his hand, put a stack of money on it, put his other hand on top of it, and just started making it rain.
Wow.
Like, I don't want to upset people here, but just trigger warning. I feel like maybe DC might be a little more on board with the entire universe before they decide to totally destroy it. Am I wrong, or
New 52 kind of flies in the face of that, I think.
okay?
Yeah, I mean, New 52. He's definitely he's not wrong there, and I think when they advertised New 52 as a whole new restart, and that's what they did. They said, okay, we're going to restart this, and all of these heroes are going to start from the same point so that the shared universe is on, between titles, between Batman and Detective Comics. It's all going to start from this point, from this starting line, and that starting line is going to be the same across Batman, Detective Comics, Action Comics, Superman, Wonder Woman, and then just Wonder Woman solo title and Green Lantern and this, that, and across all these other titles. And they released 52 titles, and they were saying, okay, we want everybody to be at square one together, and the whole universe can move forward in a unified fashion. And it was Dan Didio's baby, and very quickly, very, very quickly, what readers got was not at all what DC had advertised. And the main example I can use is that, okay, in Action Comics, that took place well before Superman was Superman. It took place years before, and he was just still trying to and Clark was laying low. He had just jeans, some work boots, and a T-shirt on. And he had a cape, but he had the Superman emblem on his T-shirt, which I don't know how you buy a T-shirt with a logo on it. That it didn't necessarily line up. But then there's the Superman title that took place years after he had been around. The whole world knew who he was.
Right.
And so how they had kind of sold it to everybody back in in late 2010 and going into 2011 was that, okay, in Detective Comics you're going to see what happens on Tuesday, and then in Batman you're going to be seeing what happened in the same story and everything on Thursday. And all these other titles are going to be just kind of filling in throughout the week or the month, the year of what's been going on with these stories. And they very quickly jump. I don't know if they jump ship from that idea right from the off, or that's just not what it was to begin with.
Okay.
And so it had so many varying degrees of what was going on with certain characters, and people were trying to figure out, we were right back to where we were, is okay, where does this, that, and the other line up? And it just didn't, because in Detective Comics, Batman seemed older and more experienced than he was in Detective Comics, or in Batman, he seemed far younger and was just now getting around to fighting the Joker for the first time.
So then timelines would be important in terms of the series that you're reading, and where they'd be like the new.
You have a little bit more of importance when you get down to just a singular title, sure.
Okay.
And especially if it's right there at the beginning of a universal reboot, as it were.
Right.
Rebirth has shown us this is what just happened. Rebirth happened in 2016, late 2016, early 2017,
Okay.
where Warner, or not Warner Bros., but where DC decided, okay, 5 years have gone by and our readership numbers aren't really where we want them to be. Our fan reception isn't where we really want it to be. So we need to give a reason for these changes, or we need to, let's explain. Let's give an explanation. Let's not just, oh, hey, here's a big bad guy who is going to change the universe and we can restart it again. This was a little bit more unique of a take on it, and saying, okay, the changes that had taken place in the New 52, this is what happened. And in the ongoing series this year of the Doomsday Clock, is we're supposed to be getting an explanation for why the New 52 was the way it was. And in their the single issue that came out, the DC Universe Rebirth, it's just a single issue done by Jeff Johns, really set it in motion very well. And when I keep saying Warner Brothers, but when DC reached back out to their old reliables of artists and writers, we've gotten content that is out of this world across the board, it has a more cohesive timeline since Rebirth started.
Okay.
We do offshoot, like the Batman metal stuff. I don't think has anything to do with their main universe going on, but I don't think it was even advertised to have an effect. It was just, hey, here's a cool story somebody came up with.
Yeah, the metal stuff is referenced in other comics. Like, oh, hey, do you remember when it's almost like a Family Guy flashback joke or manatee joke? There's a few times that you have those references in Rebirth comics of, oh, well, what about when we had to deal with the blah blah blah, oh, and it's a metal reference. It looked like it seems like it tied in, but it didn't have much of an overarching effect. And yeah, Rebirth has been absolutely fantastic so far. Unbelievably good.
And it's not, and Rebirth is trying to, I think what they're doing with Rebirth is trying to get the same result that all of DC's, I did it right this time, go me, DC's universe resets, even reaching back to the 80s when they did Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was I don't think Marvel had really done a big universe shakeup prior to that. As far as my knowledge, that was one of the big things that made Crisis on Infinite Earth such a landmark occasion, was that you had so many things going on at one time. You had so many characters involved, and not just on the surface, but deeply involved in what was going on in the conflict against the bad guy. And
Okay.
it was an all hands on deck situation. So, and when they have milestones like that through comics, and some people think that they're unnecessary and they are a big distraction, and they're not necessarily that big, that they're not that high in quality, but they, the other side of the argument is, okay, sometimes you need to reset. You need to have these characters retooled in order for whatever that generation's audience is.
Right.
In the, when we had like the Green Arrow story in which Speedy, his sidekick, was addicted to heroin. It was a real story, and it was pertinent to the time. For what was going on sociopolitically in the world. Okay, heroin was a big deal, and it was it was kind of that monster lurking in the corner. Nowadays, that's even a bigger deal. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we got another, hero or somebody that had an opioid addiction, just so we could have a character that's updated dealing with a real world problem.
And that's interesting that the actual character, well, the superhero character themselves, personally are dealing with the issue rather than them going up against other people
or having like a close family member.
Right.
Or,
it kind of makes the situation more real.
That's happened a few times, and actually, to sort of extend off of something that House was just saying, when it comes to timelines, there are certain things that do not get messed with, no matter the timeline reset. Peter Parker's Uncle Ben will always be dead. They don't resurrect him, no matter how often they reboot the timeline in DC. Krypton is gone and Thomas and Martha Wayne are dead. There's certain things that are character defining that no matter what timeline reboot, what changes, what retcons they do, are untouchable. So there are some sort of mainstays that carry over through, like even going from pre-crisis continuity to post-crisis continuity to New 52 to DC Rebirth, Krypton is gone. Pre House of M, pre Civil War, up to whatever they're doing, Marvel now, I think it is, Uncle Ben is dead. That's how it always is. So you do have those sort of signposts that kind of tell you, hey, there are some changes, but the core of what you're looking for should still be here. And sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes, a writer will take a character in such a radically different direction that you're just lost entirely.
Kind of what happened in Flashpoint, and then it had to be fixed because things were so wrong.
Flashpoint was never intended. The Flashpoint universe was never intended to be the universe. Right. That was clearly never going to happen. But because who wants to see a scrawny Superman that is shy? But
the interesting part, the interesting part is if you want to use the term butterfly effect, if you will, it almost seems as if they pick and choose what that effect does versus completely altering something significantly. But isn't that kind of copying out? Like, why couldn't an event resurrect or bring back Ben? Is it because Ben dying, right, and effectively made Spider-Man who he was, right? Now, what if Ben was still alive, and what if the personality of Spider-Man changed? I mean, like, wouldn't we want to explore that idea?
So what you would have, and that's why Marvel has the What If series every now and then.
Okay.
But the thing is, Uncle Ben's death was the catalyst for him doing that. And it wasn't that Uncle Ben just died. It's that Uncle Ben died at the hands of somebody Peter had the power to stop and didn't. He didn't take the responsibility that he should have with his new great power, and that resulted in him losing a loved one. If Uncle Ben doesn't die, then he's just a kid who's strong. And then you might get into him becoming a bit of a prick because he's in high school, and now he doesn't have to be afraid of Flash Thompson or anybody else. So those certain events mark the catalyst. It's the same thing with Batman. If Thomas and Martha Wayne aren't dead, Batman is then Richie Rich, right, who I still suspect goes on to commit suicide and become Casper the Friendly Ghost. They look exactly the same. Tell me I'm wrong.
But what if you had a story where Ben, was alive and Peter Parker becomes his dick, and as time progresses, the symbiote comes out, and then you have Eddie Brock who inadvertently becomes the hero?
I mean, it's a concept. It's something that I could definitely see them writing, and maybe they have. I don't know if there's a what if Uncle Ben never died. But I know there's a lot of different what ifs. Some of them are actually kind of interesting. They usually only do them in one issue, though.
Copyright 2018, Nerd Explain It.
Oh, yeah. You go right ahead and try to take on Disney on that
one. Sorry, though.
I'll use my black privilege.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how somebody would write that. That'd be something that would be worth asking a writer, something like that. And then another point that Jess was making about dealing with, seeing. Actually, I think both of you were talking about heroes and their people close to them dealing with issues like drug addiction, stuff like that.
Right.
That's actually become more prevalent since that Green Lantern, Green Arrow event back in the 70s. Because, like as I mentioned before, Daredevil's longtime girlfriend and love interest, Karen Page, becomes a heroin addict. And in the Frank Miller story, Born Again, she sells his secret identity to the Kingpin for a heroin fix. Be on the lookout for that in Daredevil season 3, by the way, because I suspect it's coming.
Wow.
Yeah, Tony Stark, demon in a bottle. Tony Stark as Iron Man is a raging alcoholic. So DC really kicked that off with Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And then everybody else sort of jumped on the train and started running with it. Now you can see it pretty often, as a matter of fact. I'm actually looking at my books right now and thinking, oh, well, Batman, there's a story called Batman Venom. Batman becomes addicted to Bane's venom.
Really?
It's a pretty good story right up until Batman punches a shark. Then it gets a little crazy. Like, you've heard of the term "jump the shark"? No, punch the shark should be the because that's where that story goes a little nuts.
Wow.
Yeah, it gets up there. It gets a little weird. I swear. Oh, House, do you remember years ago, our friend Theo, I think it was telling us about a Marvel character that was fueled by cocaine?
Yeah.
God, listeners, find out who that is and let us know. But there is a Marvel character from, I think, the 80s who is 100% fueled by cocaine.
Yeah,
Snowblind, I think?
Snowflame. And no, he was a DC character.
He was a DC character. Oh, God.
Yeah. And he wasn't a hero. He was a straight-up villain.
Oh my God, he's wonderful.
What year was that? What year does it say that came out?
1988.
Okay, so getting back to it, so Snowflame was a DC villain, but look at that year. That's actually kind of important. 1988 is actually right at the end of Reagan's second administration, and part of Reagan's administration was the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's entirely possible that character was created to be reflective of the Reagan era war on drugs, and thus painting cocaine as this horrific drug, which it was, but didn't stop a bunch of people from doing it back then.
So there is a path that can be followed, and there are definitely recommendations that can be made to keep people informed of what's going on in a particular timeline or a particular era of comics. But the timeline for an entire universe is like our own in reality, in that the smaller timelines may or may not be reflective or that important of the entire universe from beginning to end. What's going on with Spider-Man from 92 to 95? There could be good story. There's gonna be good stories in there. There's gonna be bad stories in there. It's not really indicative or necessary to understand the character, to understand from inception to that point.
So essentially, one doesn't have to exactly know the entire history of a character because they have content like this, our podcast, that explains it for them.
Correct. So we're going to follow up with our next episodes. We're jumping in and focusing on one character,
right?
But we're going to get there. We're going to focus on, some of the most popular characters, probably out, right out of the gate. We'll jump into some villains that are pretty popular.
Ooh, yeah.
We're gonna cover the history, because my thing is I want to know, as I'm getting more interested in reading more comics, there's some things that, if I'm reading a story and I don't know what the hell they're talking about, I run to House and Dave and I'm like, what's going on here? Who's this person? Because I don't know what this is, but I'm excited.
And I'm definitely excited to dig into some of the more, I don't want to say obscure, but the more vague type of villains. The two that jump to mind that have so much content behind them and such an interesting personality, or the two I jump up that I can think of off the bat, are Bullseye and the Joker. They're two very well loved and very very highly regarded villains, especially the Joker. He's arguably the best villain ever, and the best antithesis to a hero. And then you have Bullseye, very similar in how he goes on the offensive against the hero that they in Daredevil. But these are two characters that they don't have names. We have aliases that are given, and tying it into the timeline stuff. These villains have behaved very differently depending on what's going on in the universe. Sometimes the Joker is a criminal mastermind, that to the level of like Lex Luthor. Sometimes he's just a psycho. Bullseye, sometimes he's very tactical, and he's very I think he's always tactful, but sometimes he's just a hired gun and he won't move unless some money's been put in front of him. Other times, he's a ravenous dog who is so single-minded a purpose that's really all there is to him. But there's so much enigma surround those two characters. Episodes on those guys is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to do those.
Any villain conversation I'm down for. I love villains.
And that, everybody, was our discussion on the importance of timelines when it comes to comic book universes. I think that's going to do it for us today. One thing, since we were talking about some individual characters and finding jumping on points, we're each going to go and give a suggestion of a character and a particular story. If we can, we'll give the writer, so you can kind of hunt that down, and so you can pick up, go to your local comic book shop and pick it up and give it a read. Again, like we mentioned last week, if you've got local comic book shops that you frequent, let us know. Post on our social medias, and let us know where they are. What names are? What's the name of the comic book shop? What's so good about it? Is their selection awesome? Is their customer service great? Let us know so we can check them out ourselves, or so we can recommend them to other people. My recommendation is going to be the one book I recommend to everybody who is interested in Superman. Is going to be the J. Michael Straczynski story from 2007, I believe. It's going to be the story Superman Grounded. Fantastic story about Superman kind of putting his feet back on the hard soil of the earth, and trying to figure out what his place in the world really is. Is he just around to beat up the big bad guys, or does he stand for something a little bit more important? Who else has got a recommendation?
I've got one.
Go for it.
So, I love my Wonder Woman. She's wonderful. There's a title. It is Wonder Woman, Who is Wonder Woman? It's written by Alan Heinberg, and I believe that was with Terry and Rachel Dodson, if I'm correct. It's pretty wonderful. It covers everything about Wonder Woman, Donna Troy. You even get into the Invisible Jet, and basically any aspect of her that has ever been a thing, except for Jumpa. Jumpa was not in Who is Wonder Woman, but that's a thing I just recently learned. She had a pet kangaroo.
Nice.
It's an alien species of kangaroo, and her name was Jumpa. And for some reason, Jumpa's not around anymore, and she doesn't like to talk about it. But that has nothing to do about this book I'm recommending right now. But it's really good. You jump in, you don't have to know anything, and it explains all things Wonder Woman.
What, how random, how many animals did you run out, did they run out of? Because they already did, they have Bat Cow, they have the cat for Supergirl, they have Astro, Streaky. Yeah, Streaky, they have, what's Batman? Ace, the Bat Dog, Crypto. So did they just run out and eventually if I could give Wonder Woman a kangaroo?
Well, yeah, because they also gave Supergirl a horse that she also slept with.
Maybe they'll give Flash a koala bear or something.
I was just thinking, man, they need to give Flash a turtle. Like a speedster turtle. That'd be so good. I'd read the crap out of that. They actually had, let's see, DC had a series for a while called the Super Pets that was all about those characters. And Marvel had a Marvel Pets one. It was the Pet Avengers, and they were led by the Inhumans dog, Lockjaw, which is totally what I would name an English bulldog
it's
if I owned one.
Sky Kanga? Because I thought the species was just Kanga. Yeah, alias. Okay, so Sky Kanga.
I gotta say, DC, sometimes not that great with their space animals. Like Lobo's dolphins, they're just space dolphins.
They're awesome.
Yeah. It reminds me of the space duck from Dragon Ball Z Abridged.
Space duck.
Quack!
There you go. Dave, what you got?
All right, so I'm going to break up the DC monotony here. And I'm going to give you a recommendation, all you great listeners out there, that is both a Marvel one and actually delves into some Marvel history. You can get there's a book out there. It was written by Kurt Busiek, fantastic comic writer, and drawn by Alex Ross. You don't find a better artist than Alex Ross. He does photorealism, and it's amazing. It is simply called Marvels, and it follows the journey of a boots on the ground photojournalist as he lives through the biggest Marvel events of the Golden and Silver Age, such as the arrival of the Fantastic Four, the arrival of the mutants in the first X-Men comic, the coming of Galactus, Namor the Submariner's first appearance, all written fantastically by Kurt Busiek, illustrated beautifully by Alex Ross, and this is one that they reprint all the time, so the availability at your comic shop should be spectacular. Go out, check it out, and you'll get that nice little history of the Marvel Universe from a boots-on-the-ground perspective.
Nice. I like that. Greg, I know you haven't been reading comics for too long, but do you have a recommendation of, just give us a story that pulled you in a little bit? What you got anything?
Honestly, I don't have anything in terms of like content, but Spider-Gwen, she's to add to Marvel's end of suggestions. Spider-Gwen is a character that I've been kind of interested in lately. Her and Miles Morales, but more so Spider-Gwen, just because her outfit's pretty awesome.
Fair enough.
So she's someone that I'm going to be looking into here.
Fair enough.
So yeah, if anyone in our audience has any suggestions on Spider-Gwen, let us know. I'll definitely check that out.
Very good. Very good.
All right.
Yeah, we're open for conversation on social media.
And that will do it for the end of today's podcast, episode 2. Be sure to check us all out online, nerdsplainet.com. Also on our social media, Nerdsplainet, at your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram. And also don't forget to subscribe, listen, and rate our podcast. We'll greatly appreciate it. And awesome.
See you guys.
All right. See ya.
See you guys. Take care.
Read my mind, Greg. Do it. I don't remember.
Chinese food.
Titties.
Chocolate milk.
Oh my god, I'm so hungry right now.
For those, if this audio makes it into the episode, for those listening, our very own Jess has a predilection for Chinese food and chocolate milk when she's not feeling well, or when she's just generally famished. So,
And that's how we get sponsors.
take that. That's right.
Brought to you by China.